The key wouldn't turn. Daniel stood in the hallway outside apartment 13F, violin case in one hand, duffel in the other, jet-lagged and confused. He jiggled the key again, the same key he'd used for 3 years, now on a keychain, with a tiny Edelweiss charm he'd bought in Salzburg. Nothing. The lock felt different, wrong. He knocked. Footsteps inside, then the door opened and there was Mara. Different haircut, shorter, sharper. Different perfume too, something woody he didn't recognize. She looked at him without surprise, without anger, without anything really. Just looked. "Hey," he said, smiling despite his exhaustion. "Lock's being weird. You don't live here anymore." He laughed. Had to be a joke. Some bit she was doing about his long absence, playing the scorned girlfriend. He waited for her to crack, to roll her eyes and let him in. She didn't move. "Mara, come on. I'm exhausted. The flight from Vienna was— I'm serious, Daniel. You need to leave." The hallway suddenly felt too bright, the fluorescent hum too loud. He shifted the duffel bag on his shoulder and looked past her into the apartment. His reading chair sat by the window, except it wasn't burgundy anymore. Someone had reupholstered it in gray. The walls looked different too, lighter. Had she repainted? "What are you talking about?" His voice came out smaller than he intended. "I don't know what you think this is," she said, her tone patient, almost kind, "but you don't live here. You need to leave before I call security." His heart kicked against his ribs. This wasn't a bit. He pushed past her gently, not forceful, but not asking permission either, and stepped into the apartment. His music stand, gone. The bookshelves had been rearranged, his books mixed with others he didn't recognize or maybe removed entirely. A men's jacket hung on the coat hook by the door. Charcoal wool, not his. "Mara, what the hell?" A man emerged from the bedroom, shirtless, holding a coffee mug. Younger than Daniel, maybe early 30s, with the careful posture of someone who did yoga. He looked at Mara with concern. "Everything okay?" She sighed, and in that sigh, Daniel heard something rehearsed. "This is the guy I mentioned, Daniel. He stayed here for a few weeks last spring when he was between places. I think he got a little— attached?" The man nodded slowly, sympathetically, like he'd heard this story before. Daniel's throat closed. He looked around wildly. Where was his desk? His filing cabinet with sheet music? The photo of his sister that used to sit on the bookshelf? "We've lived here for 3 years, Daniel said, hearing how desperate he sounded, how unhinged. "Mara, tell him. Tell him the truth." She exchanged a look with the stranger, patient, weary. The look you give someone when dealing with a situation you'd hope to avoid. "Daniel, this isn't healthy. You should really talk to someone." She reached into a drawer by the door and pulled out a business card. "Dr. Sarah Chen, licensed therapist." She held it out to him like an offering, like charity. The man in the doorway— Marcus, Daniel suddenly remembered. She'd mentioned someone named Marcus in a text 2 months ago that he'd barely registered, watched with what might have been pity. "I live here," Daniel said again, but even to himself it sounded like pleading. "My name is on the lease. My mail comes here. I'm going to ask you one more time to leave," Mara said quietly. "If you don't, I'm calling the police and telling them you're trespassing." The word trespassing landed like a physical blow. He looked at Marcus, searching for something. Confusion, doubt, anything that suggested this man knew something was wrong. Marcus just stared back, uncomfortable but certain. Certain that Daniel was the intruder. Certain that Mara was the victim. Daniel backed toward the door, his legs moving without his permission. Mara followed, her hand on the doorknob, her face composed and calm and utterly unfamiliar. When he was in the hallway again, she said, "Take care of yourself, Daniel. Really." The door closed. He heard the deadbolt slide into place. A new deadbolt, he realized. A sound slightly different from the old one. He stood there with his violin case and his duffel bag, the overhead lights buzzing, the sound of a television filtering through someone else's door down the hall. 13 floors up and the street noise still reached him here. Car horns and distant sirens and the ordinary chaos of the city continuing, like nothing had changed. His hands were shaking. He pressed the elevator button and waited, staring at the door to 13F like it might open again, like Mara might come out laughing and tell him it was all a terrible joke. The elevator arrived. He got in. In the lobby, Jorge looked up from the desk and grinned. Jorge with his thermos of coffee and his reading glasses on a chain, and 15 years of night shifts written into the comfortable slouch of his shoulders. "Mr. Daniel, you're back. How was Vienna?" Daniel opened his mouth and nothing came out. Jorge's smile faded. He came around the desk, surprisingly quick for a man in his 60s, and guided Daniel to the small alcove by the mailboxes where residents sometimes sat to sort packages. "Sit. Tell me what happened." So Daniel told him. The words came out jumbled and wrong, the story sounding insane even as he said it. Jorge listened without interrupting, his face growing darker. When Daniel finished, Jorge stood and went back to the desk. He bent down and pulled out a battered manila folder from underneath, the kind that had been handled so many times the edges were fuzzy. "I keep copies," Jorge said, sitting back down and opening the folder. "Management, they lose everything. Every lease, every maintenance request, every package log. I keep the originals down here." He spread the papers on the small table between them. Daniel's lease agreement signed 3 years ago, Mara's signature next. To his. Maintenance requests for a dripping faucet, a broken blind, a outlet that sparked, all filed under Daniel Rosen, 13F. Mail logs going back months, years. His name over and over. Daniel touched the papers like they might dissolve. Proof, physical, undeniable proof that he existed here, that his life in this building was real. Jorge poured coffee from his thermos into the lid and handed it to Daniel. "She had a locksmith come Tuesday," Jorge said quietly. "Told me you gave permission, that you were transferring the lease to her name only. She had paperwork, looked official. I thought it was strange, you not mentioning it, but she said you were staying in Europe permanently." He shook his head. "I should have called you." "It's not your fault." Daniel pulled out his phone, scrolled through messages. Text threads with friends that suddenly looked different. "Wait, Mara said you were just crashing at her place?" From his friend Ben. "Thought you moved to Berlin?" From another. He opened his calendar app, all the shared events with Mara, 3 years of dinners and concerts and ordinary life, gone from his view. Deleted. He switched to social media, pulled up Mara's profile, scrolled through 3 years of photos. She'd untagged him from everything. Every picture that showed them together, gone from his timeline, visible only on hers, and in those photos his face was now conspicuously cropped out or blurred or positioned just out of frame, like he'd been erased in stages carefully, methodically. "This wasn't impulse," Daniel said, more to himself than to Jorge. "She planned this." Jorge nodded slowly. "You want I should make copies of these, before the morning shift comes in?" "Yes, please." While Jorge went to the back office with the folder, Daniel sat in the alcove and tried to breathe. 6 months performing Mahler in ornate European concert halls, standing ovations in Vienna and Prague and Berlin, and he'd come home to this, to his entire life rewritten like it had never happened. He almost laughed. Didn't. He booked a hotel room on his phone, the first one that came up, generic and beige and blessedly anonymous. Jorge returned with copies in a fresh manila envelope and walked Daniel to the door. "You need anything, you call me," Jorge said. "I'm here every night, 11 to 7. In the hotel room, Daniel unpacked his violin, just to feel something familiar in his hands. He ran his thumb over the case's worn leather, the scuff marks from a dozen airports, the stickers from concert halls across Europe. He could call a lawyer right now, could march back to the building in the morning with police and force his way in, make Mara explain, make her accountable. The thought felt both satisfying and exhausting. He called his sister in Portland instead. She answered on the third ring, groggy. "Do you know what time it is?" "Did Mara say anything to you? About the apartment?" A pause. "What?" "No, I mean she posted about renovating last month. You approved that, right?" His stomach dropped. "What did she say exactly?" "Just that you guys were updating the place. New furniture, new paint. She posted pictures. It looks good, actually." "Why?" He told her. The silence on the other end stretched so long he thought the call had dropped. "Daniel, what the actual fuck?" "Yeah." They talked for 20 minutes, his sister's anger a comfort even though it solved nothing. When he hung up, he lay on the hotel bed and stared at the ceiling, at the generic light fixture and the smoke detector blinking red. He could force his way back in, could call the police, show them Jorge's papers, file reports and press charges, but something about Mara's face, the calm way she'd handed him that therapist card, The careful performance for Marcus stopped him. She wanted a war, expected it probably, expected him to fight her the obvious way, with lawyers and police and public confrontation. Expected him to look desperate and unhinged and prove her story true. He wouldn't give her that. Couldn't. Not that way. But what other way was there? Morning came too early. Daniel showered in the sterile hotel bathroom and put on yesterday's clothes, feeling untethered from his own life. He took a cab back to the building, walked through doors Jorge had already opened 1,000 times for him, and rode the elevator to the management office on the second floor. Helen sat behind her desk, surrounded by stacks of maintenance requests and lease renewals, looking like she'd been worn down by 10,000 tenant complaints. She was maybe 50, with reading glasses pushed up into her gray-streaked hair. When Daniel walked in with Jorge's envelope, she sighed before he even spoke. "Mr. Rosen, I heard there was an incident last night." "An incident?" He laid the papers on her desk. "I've lived here for 3 years. My girlfriend changed the locks while I was out of the country and told everyone I never lived there. That's not an incident. That's theft." Helen put on her glasses and reviewed the documents slowly, maddeningly slowly. When she finally looked up, her expression was tired and sympathetic and completely unhelpful. "This is a civil matter. You're both on the lease, which means you both have legal right to occupy the apartment. But I can't force entry without police involvement, and police won't act without a domestic dispute report filed through proper channels." She pushed the papers back across the desk. "You need a lawyer, Mr. Rosen. I'm sorry." Outside in the hallway, Daniel leaned against the wall and tried to think. A lawyer meant time, meant money, meant exactly the kind of drawn-out battle Mara probably expected. Wanted, even. She'd prepared for this. The reupholstered furniture, the moved-in boyfriend, the changed narrative. She was 3 moves ahead. He walked the neighborhood instead of going back to the hotel. The morning was cool, early autumn just starting to sharpen the air. He ended up at the corner cafe, where he and Mara used to get breakfast on Sundays, back when Sundays meant something. The same barista worked the counter, a young guy with a top knot who'd always remembered Daniel's order. Except today the barista looked at him with polite blankness when Daniel said his name. "Oh, you're Daniel?" "Mara mentioned you might come around." The barista wiped down the espresso machine, not quite meeting Daniel's eyes. "She said you two dated briefly last year, but it didn't work out. Said you might be, I don't know, confused about things." The coffee in Daniel's hand suddenly felt too hot. "Confused?" "Yeah, man, sorry. She seemed really worried about you." The barista's discomfort was genuine, which somehow made it worse. He believed her. They all believed her. Daniel left without drinking the coffee. He walked back to the building and slipped in through the side entrance that led to the package room, timing it for the afternoon shift when Jorge wouldn't be at the desk. The package room was small and windowless, shelves crammed with boxes and envelopes waiting for pickup. He shouldn't have been looking. Knew it was probably illegal or at least creepy. Did it anyway. Boxes addressed to Marcus Chen at apartment 13F. 3 weeks' worth of deliveries. Amazon, clothing companies, a box from a furniture store. Daniel pulled out his phone and photographed the labels, then put everything back exactly as he'd found it. His hands were shaking again. 3 weeks. She'd been moving Marcus in for 3 weeks, maybe longer. While Daniel was performing in Prague, while he was texting her good morning from hotel rooms in Vienna, while he was buying her that silver bracelet in a shop near the Danube. She was erasing him methodically, piece by piece. He left the package room and found himself in the small public garden behind the building, a patch of green where residents brought their dogs. A bench, some struggling shrubs, a tree that dropped seeds all over the pathway. He sat and watched a woman walk past with a terrier, the dog straining at its leash. The woman paused, looked at him more closely. "Daniel, is that you?" Mrs. Keating lived on the 9th floor, had the terrier that barked at delivery people, always complained about the elevator being slow. She'd lived in the building longer than almost anyone, knew everyone's business. "Mrs. Keating, I thought you'd moved." She let the terrier sniff around the base of the tree. "Mara said you took a permanent position in Berlin, with one of the orchestras." His chest tightened. "She said that?" "Well, yes. Last month in the elevator. She seemed sad about it, but said it was a wonderful opportunity for you." Mrs. Keating's forehead creased. "That's not what happened?" "No, I was on tour, but I live here in 13F with Mara." "Oh." The woman looked genuinely confused. "That's odd." She was very specific about Berlin. After Mrs. Keating left, Daniel sat on the bench and started mapping it in his head. The doormen, what had Mara told them? The neighbors, each one with a slightly different story but all cohesive in the important ways. He was transient, temporary, not really part of the building's fabric. And now he was gone, moved away, a brief chapter closed. She'd built a narrative and distributed it carefully, person by person, and because Mara was charming and helpful and had lived there just as long as he had, everyone believed her. He pulled out his phone and searched for practice studios, found one that rented by the hour in Midtown, took the subway there and signed in under a fake name because he didn't want to explain anything to anyone. The room was small and soundproofed, just a chair and a music stand and blessed silence. Daniel took out his violin and played Sibelius, something mournful and precise that he'd performed in Helsinki 2 months ago. His bow shook on the first few notes, rage or grief or exhaustion. He couldn't tell. He stopped, breathed, started again. The music poured out of him, 6 months of loneliness and airport hotels and standing ovations from strangers. He played until his fingers ached, until the bow moved smooth and certain again, until his breathing steadied. And somewhere, in the middle of the second movement, something clicked into place. Mara hadn't just taken the apartment, she'd taken his place in the world, his spot in the social fabric of the building, the relationships he'd built with neighbors and doormen and the woman at the cafe. Those connections weren't documented anywhere. No lease could prove them. No lawyer could subpoena them. They existed only in the shared memory of the community, and Mara had systematically rewritten that memory. But memory worked both ways. If she could erase him through storytelling, through presence and careful performance, then maybe he could write himself back in the same way. Not with lawyers and police reports and angry confrontations, with presence, with proof of a different kind. He lowered the violin and stared at the soundproofed wall. It was insane. Probably wouldn't work. But the alternative was months of legal battles, depositions, court dates, all while Mara spun new stories and he looked more desperate with each filing. The next morning, Daniel went back to the building during the afternoon, when more residents would be around. Found Mrs. Keating in the garden again with her terrier. He approached carefully, not wanting to seem aggressive or strange. "Mrs. Keating, can I ask you something?" She looked wary but stopped. The terrier sniffed Daniel's shoes. "You throw a birthday party for your dog every year, right? In the courtyard?" Her expression softened slightly. "Yes, Biscuit's turning 12 next month." "Would you let me play? At the party? Just some music, no charge. I'd like to." She studied him for a long moment. "Mara said you were in Berlin." "Mara," Daniel said carefully, "tells a lot of stories. But I'm here, and I've been here, and I'd really like to play for Biscuit's birthday." Something shifted in her face. Not quite belief, but curiosity. "All right, yes. That would be lovely, actually." He found another neighbor that week, a man named Mr. Patel who lived on the 8th floor and had mentioned once years ago that he loved jazz. Daniel knocked on his door directly. "Mr. Patel, I'm Daniel from I Know Who You Are." The man's expression was neutral, unreadable. "I know Mara said I left, but I didn't. I'm still here. And I remember you mentioned your anniversary is coming up. Would you want violin music at your dinner? I could play jazz, if you'd like. No charge." Patel looked at him for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" "Because I live here. Because music is what I do. Because—" Daniel trailed off, searching for words that didn't sound desperate. "Because I want to." Patel's wife appeared behind him, curious. They exchanged a glance. She said something to her husband in Gujarati, too quick for Daniel to catch. Patel nodded slowly. "All right. Yes. Our anniversary is the 23rd. The building's resident association met on the first Wednesday of every month in the community room. Daniel had gone once or twice before, usually just to listen to complaints about the recycling system or proposals for holiday decorations. This time he arrived early and sat in the back. Mara walked in 10 minutes later with Marcus. She went pale when she saw Daniel, actually stumbled half a step. Marcus put a hand on her elbow, concerned. Daniel didn't look at them, just sat and waited for the meeting to start. Tom, the association president, called things to order. Retired teacher, lived on the 6th floor, had a booming voice that carried. The usual business, lobby renovations, package room organization, complaints about noise. Daniel raised his hand. Tom looked surprised. Yes? Daniel, right? I'd like to organize a concert in the courtyard. Open to all residents, no charge. I'm a violinist, and I thought it might be nice to have live music here. The room went quiet. Tom's face lit up. What a wonderful idea. We haven't had live music since that string quartet in 2019. I'd forgotten you're a musician. I've heard you practice through the walls for years. Beautiful sound. Mara's voice cut through. I don't think that's appropriate. Tom turned to her, surprised. Why not? It's a lovely gesture. I just meant with his schedule being so unpredictable, and I'm available, Daniel said calmly. Anytime that works for everyone. He watched Tom process it, the mismatch between Mara's words and what he remembered. The years of hearing violin through the walls, the cognitive dissonance. Mara recovered quickly, forced a smile. Of course, I just want to make sure Daniel isn't overcommitting. He travels so much. I'm here now, Daniel said, looking at Tom, not at Mara. I can commit. The association voted. It passed easily. Tom scheduled it for 2 weeks out, Sunday afternoon. When the meeting ended, Daniel walked past Mara in the hallway. She grabbed his arm, her grip tight. This is harassment. He stopped, looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. Marcus hovered nearby, uncertain. No, Daniel said quietly. This is me living in my building, playing music, being present. If that bothers you, that's your problem. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, he saw something crack in her composure. Fear, maybe, or anger. Then she let go and walked away, heels clicking on the tile floor. That night, Jorge told him that Mara had come to the desk during his shift, demanded he destroy the old lease copies. Jorge had refused. I told her, I keep records for everyone. It's my job. Management needs them. Jorge shook his head. She was real upset. Said you were stalking her, harassing her. I told her playing a concert isn't harassment, it's community service. Daniel leaned against the desk, feeling something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not quite hope, but not despair either. Something like possibility. Thanks, Jorge. You're a good man, Jorge said. Don't let anyone tell you different. Daniel went back to his hotel room and practiced until midnight, bow moving across strings in the dark, building something he couldn't quite name yet. A way back, a way forward, something. The morning of the concert, Daniel woke early in his hotel room and stared at the ceiling. 2 weeks of careful, quiet work, reconnecting with neighbors, practicing in the courtyard during early evenings when people walk their dogs, nodding to residents in the elevator. Not explaining himself, not defending. Just being present, undeniably, consistently there. He'd kept his interactions brief, almost casual. A comment about the weather to the woman on the 4th floor. Holding the door for the older man with the walker. Small things, human things. The kind of daily exchanges that build the invisible architecture of a community. Now the day was here, and his hands felt steadier than they had in weeks. He arrived at the building at noon with his violin case and a borrowed speaker for announcements. The courtyard was small, maybe 30 by 40 feet, surrounded by the building on 3 sides, open to the sky. Worn pavers, a few planters with struggling marigolds, string lights someone had hung years ago that probably didn't work anymore. Jorge helped him carry folding chairs from the community room, setting them up in loose rows. How many you expecting? Jorge asked. No idea. Well, I'm coming. Soon as my shift ends at 7, I'll be here. Mrs. Keating arrived first, an hour early, carrying a platter of cookies covered in plastic wrap. Biscuit strained at his leash, barking at a pigeon. She looked nervous. I wasn't sure if I should bring something. It felt strange not to. It's perfect, Daniel said, helping her arrange the cookies on a small table they'd set up. Thank you. She hesitated, then said quietly, Mara came by my apartment yesterday. Said you were going through a difficult time. That you might say some strange things. Daniel's stomach tightened. What did you tell her? I told her I'd known you for 3 years. That you'd never said a strange thing in your life. That my memory might be old, but it's not that old. She adjusted her glasses. She didn't like that much. People started trickling down around 2. Mr. Patel and his wife carrying folding fans because the afternoon sun was brutal. Tom from the resident association grinning widely. The woman from the fourth floor Daniel had seen in the elevator. A young couple he didn't recognize, probably new tenants. The man with the walker, who Jorge had to help down the back stairs. By 2:15, maybe 20 people sat in the courtyard. Not a huge crowd, but more than Daniel had hoped for. He scanned the faces, looking for Mara. She wasn't there. Hadn't expected her to be. Then Marcus appeared at the back, leaning against the wall near the door to the building. Alone. His arms were crossed, his expression uncertain, like he wasn't sure why he'd come but couldn't stay away. Daniel set up his music stand, checked the tuning. His hands were completely steady now. He'd chosen Vivaldi's Four Seasons, summer specifically, because it was July and the courtyard was drenched in late afternoon sun, and because the piece had motion and heat and life in it. He didn't make a speech, just said, "Thank you for coming," and lifted his bow. The first notes sang out across the courtyard, bright and urgent. He closed his eyes and let muscle memory take over. Vienna concert halls and Prague opera houses and all those anonymous hotel rooms where he'd practiced alone. But this felt different. More immediate. More true. He could hear traffic from the street, a siren in the distance, Biscuit's collar jingling as the dog shifted position. The sounds of the world continuing around the music instead of pausing for it. When he finished the first movement, someone clapped. Then others joined. He opened his eyes and saw Mrs. Keating wiping her face, Tom grinning like a proud parent, the young couple leaning into each other, whispering. Between pieces, Daniel lowered his violin and spoke. Not about Mara, not about the apartment or the injustice or any of it. About the building. I moved here in 2020. First week I heard someone through those windows. He gestured to the third floor, practicing Cantonese opera. Every Thursday night for months, it was beautiful. A few people glanced up at the third floor. An older man Daniel didn't know raised his hand slightly, acknowledging. From the 8th floor, someone's kid learning chopsticks on piano, over and over, same 4 bars. He smiled. I actually grew to love it. Laughter rippled through the small crowd. Mr. Patel's wife said something to her husband, nodding. Buildings are like this, Daniel continued. We live separate lives, but we hear each other. We share walls, and elevators, and the same broken mailbox lock. We become part of each other's soundtrack. He lifted his violin again. This next piece, I arranged it myself. It's built from sounds I've heard here. Listen. He played something he'd composed over the past 2 weeks in his hotel room. A melody that incorporated rhythms from the building, the elevator chime woven into the harmony, the pattern of footsteps in the hallway echoed in the bass line. At one point, he mimicked Biscuit's bark with a sharp staccato. Mrs. Keating laughed out loud, delighted. The piece was imperfect, a little rough in places, but it was honest. When he finished, the applause was louder, more genuine. Tom stood up, clapping hard. Others followed. Afterward, people came up to him. Tom gripped his shoulder firmly. I told Helen in management this morning, you've been here as long as I have. Whatever's happening with your apartment situation, it's not right. Others nodded. The woman from the 4th floor, she introduced herself as Linda, said, I thought you'd moved. Mara said you'd taken a job overseas. But Tom's right, I've been hearing you practice for years now. You don't just disappear like that. One by one, they were revising the narrative. Not because Daniel had argued or pleaded or shown them Jorge's papers, but because their own memories didn't match the story Mara had built. The cognitive dissonance was too strong. Marcus approached last, after most of the others had drifted away. He looked sick, pale and uncomfortable, like someone who'd just realized they'd made a terrible mistake. She told me you were obsessed, Marcus said quietly. That you'd stayed at the apartment briefly, gotten attached, kept showing up uninvited after she asked you to stop. Daniel didn't say anything, just waited. But Jorge showed me the lease this morning. Original documents going back 3 years. And I've been sleeping in a bed that has violin rosin on the headboard. Little dried spots of it, like someone rested their instrument there before bed. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. What are you going to do? Daniel asked. I don't know. I moved all my stuff in. I signed a sublease agreement with her, paid first and last month. But now I don't. He looked genuinely lost. Nothing she said was true, was it? No. Marcus nodded slowly, then walked back into the building without another word. Daniel watched him go, feeling something complicated twist in his chest. Not quite sympathy, not quite satisfaction, just a weary recognition that Marcus was collateral damage in whatever game Mara had been playing. Mrs. Keating stayed to help fold up chairs. Daniel tried to tell her she didn't need to, but she waved him off. "That was lovely," she said. "Really lovely. We should do this more often. The building feels so disconnected sometimes. I'd like that." She paused, holding a folded chair. "You'll get your home back? I believe that." Daniel realized, standing there in the courtyard with the late afternoon sun turning everything gold, that he wasn't sure he wanted it anymore. Not the apartment specifically, not that space with all its memories of Mara's careful erasure, but the truth acknowledged, that mattered. Being seen, being remembered, that mattered. "Thank you," he said. That evening, Daniel sat in the hotel lobby, too restless to stay in his room, too tired to go anywhere else, when his phone rang. Helen from Building Management. "Mr. Rosen, I've spent the day speaking with residents and reviewing Jorge's files more carefully. I need to have a serious conversation with Ms. Vega about the lease situation." "What happens now?" Helen sighed, and in that sigh was a world of bureaucratic exhaustion. "Legally, you're both on the lease. She can't unilaterally remove you or change the locks without your consent. If you want to press charges for locking you out, that's your right. We'd support that." She paused. "But I have to tell you, these situations get messy. Legal fees, depositions, restraining orders. It could take months." Daniel stared out the hotel lobby window at the street beyond, at the ordinary flow of traffic and pedestrians and the pizza place across the street with its neon sign. "What if I don't want the apartment back?" "I'm sorry?" "What if I want the lease dissolved, and I want to move to a different unit if one's available?" Silence on the other end. Then, "You don't want to fight for it?" "I want to live in the building. I don't want to live there. Not anymore." He could hear Helen processing this, the surprise evident even through the phone. "We do have a studio opening on the 10th floor. Smaller than your current place, but it's quiet. Faces the courtyard, actually." "I'll take it." "You don't want to see it first?" "No. I trust you." They made arrangements to meet the next morning to sign papers. When Daniel hung up, he felt lighter. Not triumphant, not vindicated. Just lighter. Like he'd been carrying the weight of that apartment, of Mara's narrative, of the need to prove himself, and now he could finally set it down. He walked back to the building that night, not to go in, just to look at it. Stood across the street and counted up to the 13th floor, found the windows of 13F. The lights were on. He could see shadows moving inside, Mara and Marcus presumably, though from this distance he couldn't tell. Living in the space he'd shared with her, sleeping in the bed where he used to rest his violin on the headboard, walking across floors he'd paced while practicing difficult passages. Let her have it. Let her have the space and the reupholstered chair and the repainted walls. He'd build something new. 2 days later, Daniel met Helen in her office. The new lease was straightforward, studio apartment, 10th floor, facing the courtyard. Smaller, yes, but the light was better. He could see that from the windows. Tom and Mr. Patel had volunteered to help him move, which was generous considering he had almost nothing to move. Most of his belongings were still in 13F, hostage to Mara's narrative. "What about my things?" Daniel asked Helen. "You're entitled to retrieve them. I can arrange for building security to be present when you do, to prevent any confrontation." Helen pulled out a form. "You'll need to provide a list of items and schedule a time. Ms. Vega will be required to allow access." Daniel thought about it, his books, his desk, his filing cabinets of sheet music, the burgundy reading chair he'd bought at an estate sale in Brooklyn. All of it tangled up with 3 years of memories, both good and poisoned. "Just the essentials," he said. "Music, books, clothes. She can keep the furniture." "Are you sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure." The retrieval happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Helen and a security guard accompanied Daniel to 13F. Mara answered the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her face carefully composed. Marcus wasn't there, at work probably, or avoiding the situation entirely. "You have 30 minutes, Helen said firmly. "Mr. Rosen will collect his documented belongings." "Please don't interfere." Mara stood aside, silent. Daniel walked into the apartment and felt nothing. No nostalgia, no rage, no sense of violation. It was just a space now. Walls and furniture and air. His books were still on the shelves, mixed with hers. He pulled them out carefully, stacking them in boxes Tom had brought. His music stand was in the closet. Jorge had been right. Mara had kept it, probably unsure what to do with it. His filing cabinet of sheet music was in the bedroom, shoved against the wall. He wheeled it out. The burgundy chair sat by the window, reupholstered in gray. He looked at it for a long moment, remembering all the evenings he'd sat there with a book or his violin, watching the city lights come on. Then he walked past it, left it there. 30 minutes. He took 3 boxes of books, his music stand, the filing cabinet, 2 suitcases of clothes. That was it. Everything else, the furniture, the kitchen supplies, the accumulated debris of 3 years, stayed. Mara watched from the kitchen, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. As Daniel carried the last box into the hallway, she spoke. "You're really not going to fight me for it?" He set the box down, turned to look at her. She looked smaller somehow. Diminished. Or maybe he just saw her differently now. "No," he said, "I'm not." "Why not?" He could have said a dozen things, could have listed her cruelties, her manipulations, the methodical way she'd tried to erase him, could have made her face what she'd done, but standing there in the doorway of the apartment that wasn't his anymore, he realized he didn't want to give her that, didn't want to perform his pain for her entertainment or guilt. "Because I don't live here anymore," he said simply, and walked away. The studio on the 10th floor was smaller, yes, but it felt like his immediately. Tom and Mr. Patel helped him carry everything up. Jorge appeared with the music stand, grinning. "Found this in the trash room last week," Jorge said, though they all knew that was a lie. "Thought you might want it." Daniel set up his space methodically. Music stand by the window, books on the built-in shelves, filing cabinet in the corner. The room was simple, almost spare, but the light was extraordinary, afternoon sun flooding through the courtyard-facing window, illuminating dust motes in the air. That first night, Daniel stood at the window with his violin, not practicing, just holding it. Below, the courtyard was empty, still strung with the folding chairs from the concert. Mrs. Keating's cookie platter sat on the small table, forgotten. He could see into other apartments, glimpses of other lives, other stories. A woman cooking dinner, a man at a computer, a child doing homework at a kitchen table. "Buildings are like this," he'd said during the concert. "We share walls and become part of each other's soundtrack." He thought about Mara in 13F, 3 floors above, living in the space she'd fought so hard to claim. Wondered if she felt victorious. Wondered if Marcus had moved out yet, or if he was still there, sleeping in a bed with violin Rosen on the headboard, slowly realizing the scope of what he'd walked into. Then Daniel stopped wondering. Lifted his bow, played a single note into the quiet evening. No audience, no performance, no proof required. Just sound. A window opened on the 6th floor. Someone listening. He didn't know who, but they were there. And that was enough. He closed his eyes and played another note and another. Building something that didn't need a key, didn't need a lease, didn't need anyone's permission. Just the fact of his presence offered freely to the evening air, to the building, to anyone who wanted to listen. Not a home yet, but the beginning of one. The first week in the new apartment passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Daniel unpacked slowly, deliberately, placing each book on the shelf like he was building something fragile. Mornings he spent practicing, window open, letting the sound drift out into the courtyard. The acoustics were different here, brighter, less muffled. Sound bounced off the courtyard walls and came back to him slightly altered, like the building was playing along. Someone from the 11th floor yelled down on the 3rd morning, "Sounds beautiful." Daniel leaned out the window, looked up. Couldn't see who'd spoken, just an open window and a hand waving. He waved back. Small things started to accumulate. The woman from the 4th floor, Linda, left a plant outside his door with a note. "Welcome to the 10th floor. Tom stopped by with spare hangers. Found these in my storage unit. Figured you could use them." Mrs. Keating invited him to Biscuit's actual birthday party the following month. "Now that you're settled." Settled. The word felt premature, but not, well, entirely wrong. He saw Mara once that week in the elevator. He was coming back from a morning run, sweaty and tired, and pressed the button for 10. The doors started to close, then jerked open again. Mara stepped in, phone in hand, barely glancing up. Then she saw him. Her whole body went rigid. She stared straight ahead at the closed doors, her jaw tight, her breathing shallow. The elevator climbed in silence, 7, 8, 9. Daniel watched the numbers tick by, feeling nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a vague awkwardness, like running into an ex at a grocery store. At 10, the doors opened. He stepped out, turned slightly. "Have a good day." She didn't respond. The doors closed. He heard the elevator continue up to 13. That night, Jorge told him Mara was trying to break her lease. She came down this morning, real upset. Told Helen the building's become hostile, that she doesn't feel safe here anymore. Jorge snorted, organizing packages behind his desk. Helen asked her what specifically made her unsafe. She couldn't give a straight answer, just kept saying the environment had changed. What did Helen say? Told her she could pay the early termination fee if she wants out, 3 months' rent. Jorge grinned. Lady did not like that. Daniel asked him not to gossip. Jorge shrugged, not quite apologetic. Not gossip, just facts. You got a right to know what's happening in your building. Your building? The phrase lodged somewhere in Daniel's chest. He started teaching 2 weeks after moving in. Not planned, exactly. He'd been practicing one afternoon, window open, when someone knocked on his door, a woman he vaguely recognized from the 8th floor, holding her daughter's hand. The girl was maybe 9, with glasses and a serious expression. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, "but my daughter heard you playing. She's been begging for violin lessons, and I wondered, do you teach?" Daniel looked at the girl, who stared back with the kind of intense focus only children managed. "Do you play anything now?" "Piano," the girl said, "but I want to learn violin. It sounds lonely, but not sad. Just alone, in a good way." He'd never heard his instrument described like that. It caught him off guard, the accuracy of it. "I can teach you," he said. "Let me figure out rates and a schedule. Come back tomorrow?" The woman's face lit up. "Really? That would be wonderful. Thank you." The girl was his first student. Her name was Sophie, and she was a natural, patient and methodical in a way most kids weren't. She'd show up every Tuesday at 4 with her rented violin and practice book, already having done the assigned work. The second week, another student appeared, a teenager from the 5th floor who'd heard about lessons from Sophie's mother. Then a third, an adult who worked from home and wanted to learn something new. Teaching felt different from performing. Smaller, more immediate. He could see the exact moment something clicked for a student, watch their face transform when they produced a clean note for the first time. It grounded him in a way touring never had. September came. The courtyard concert felt like it had happened months ago instead of weeks. Daniel suggested to Tom that they make it a regular thing, maybe monthly, weather permitting. Tom loved the idea, brought it up at the next resident association meeting. This time Mara didn't come. Marcus did, though. Sat in the back, didn't say much. After the meeting ended, he approached Daniel in the hallway. "I moved out," Marcus said without preamble. 2 weeks ago. Got a place in Brooklyn." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Marcus shook his head. "I should have asked more questions. Should have thought it was weird that there was no trace of you in the apartment except—" He stopped. "Doesn't matter now. I just wanted you to know that I know what she did. Okay? And I'm sorry for my part in it. I didn't know, but I should have been more careful." Daniel studied him, this man who'd been sleeping in his bed, wearing his version of the story Mara had constructed. Marcus looked tired, older than he'd seemed that first night in the doorway of 13F. "Thank you for saying that," Daniel said. "It matters." They stood there for another moment, 2 men who'd been caught in the same undertow, neither quite sure how to proceed. Then Marcus nodded and left, and Daniel didn't see him again. The second courtyard concert happened on a Sunday in late September. Smaller audience this time, maybe 15 people, but they brought lawn chairs and wine and treated it less like an event and more like a gathering. Daniel played Gershwin because the evening felt jazz-shaped, warm, and loose. Mrs. Keating brought Biscuit, who barked once during Rhapsody in Blue and made everyone laugh. Afterward, people lingered. Someone brought out a speaker and played music from their phone. Old standards, Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald. Tom danced with his wife, shuffling slowly across the courtyard pavers. Sophie sat on the edge of a planter and practiced fingering patterns on an invisible violin, her face scrunched in concentration. Daniel packed up his violin and watched them, feeling something shift inside him. This wasn't about the apartment anymore, wasn't about Mara or what she'd taken or proving his existence. It was just this. People gathered in a courtyard, sharing space and time and music. Linda from the 4th floor approached with a glass of wine. You settling in okay? 10th floor treating you well? Yeah, it's good. I'm glad you stayed, she said. After everything, a lot of people would have just left. He'd thought about leaving. Those first few nights in the hotel, scrolling through apartment listings in other neighborhoods, other boroughs, fresh starts, clean slates, no history. But something about that felt like losing. Not to Mara, to himself, to the idea that he could be erased that easily. I like it here, he said simply. October arrived with sharp mornings and earlier sunsets. Daniel's sister visited, flying in from Portland for a long weekend. She'd been worried. He could hear it in her voice during their phone calls, the careful way she asked how he was doing. But when she arrived and saw the studio, saw him teaching Sophie scales in the late afternoon light, something in her face relaxed. You seem okay, she said that night over dinner at a Thai place down the street. Like, actually okay, not pretending. I am. I thought you'd be angrier, or more, she gestured vaguely. I don't know, destroyed. He'd been both those things briefly, that night in the hotel room, staring at his phone and watching his life get rewritten in real time. But anger was exhausting, and destroyed was a choice he decided not to make. She took the apartment, Daniel said. She tried to take more than that. But she couldn't, in the end. I'm still here. His sister reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Yeah, you are? She met Jorge before she left, insisted on it. Came down to the lobby at 11 p.m. on her last night just to shake his hand and thank him for keeping the paperwork. Jorge blushed, pleased and embarrassed. Just doing my job. No, she said firmly. You did more than that. Thank you. After she left, Daniel felt the apartment settle around him more completely. It was his now, not in opposition to anything Mara had claimed, but just his. He'd hung prints on the walls, finally. Nothing expensive, just images he liked from a street fair. His books had found their places on the shelves. The small kitchen smelled like the coffee he preferred. The studio was becoming a home not because he'd fought for it, but because he'd lived in it. Made it his through the accumulation of ordinary days. Jorge retired in early December. The building threw a small party in the lobby, cake from the grocery store bakery, a card everyone signed, a gift certificate to a restaurant Jorge had mentioned once. Daniel played What a Wonderful World on his violin, schmaltzy and sincere, and Jorge cried openly. You're a good man, Jorge said, hugging him hard enough to compress his ribs. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You told me that before. Well, it's still true. More true, maybe. The thing was, Daniel had let someone tell him otherwise, had stood in the hallway of 13F and almost believed Mara's version of events, almost accepted that his memory was wrong and his place in the world was smaller than he'd thought. But that moment had passed. He knew now, knew it in his bones, that he was exactly who he'd always been. Present, real, undismissible. A new tenant moved into 13F in mid-December. Daniel saw them in the elevator, a young couple, early 30s, with a baby in a carrier. They looked exhausted and happy in that new parent way. The man asked him about good pediatricians in the neighborhood. Daniel didn't have recommendations, but suggested asking Tom, who knew everything about the area. You're in 13F? Daniel asked. Yeah, just moved in last week. Place was vacant for a while, apparently. Daniel helped them carry a crib upstairs a few days later, not because he wanted to see the apartment again, but because they'd asked and he had time. Inside, it looked different. They'd repainted, pale yellow, cheerful, put up shelves for baby things. The burgundy chair was gone. He felt nothing about that. Thanks so much, the woman said, offering him coffee he politely declined. We really appreciate it. Walking back down to 10, Daniel realized he didn't think of 13F as his old apartment anymore. It was just a space in the building. Someone else's home. The shift had happened so gradually he hadn't noticed. Christmas came. The building decorated the lobby with a modest tree, white lights and silver ornaments. Mrs. Keating organized a cookie exchange in the community room. Sophie performed at her school's winter concert and invited Daniel, who went and watched her play Silent Night with the beginners' orchestra. She missed several notes but never stopped playing, her face serious and focused. You did great, he told her afterward. She beamed. On New Year's Eve, someone organized an informal gathering in the courtyard, residents bringing champagne and sparkling cider, counting down to midnight together. Daniel brought his violin, played Auld Lang Syne, while people sang badly and loudly. At midnight, fireworks erupted somewhere in the distance, visible above the building's roof. Everyone cheered. Daniel looked around at the faces: Tom and his wife, Mrs. Keating with Biscuit on a leash, Linda and Mr. Patel and Sophie's mother and a dozen others. People he'd known before, people he was getting to know now. His community. Not because of any lease or document, but because they'd chosen to see him, to remember him, to include him. Mara's lease had ended in November. He'd heard it from Helen, who'd mentioned it casually one day when they passed in the lobby. She'd paid the early termination fee and moved out, no forwarding address. Daniel had nodded, filed the information away. It didn't change anything. January brought snow and bitter cold. Daniel's practice schedule intensified. He'd been invited to perform with a small orchestra in March, a benefit concert for a music education nonprofit. His first real performance since returning from Europe. He practiced daily, sometimes twice a day, working through pieces until they were clean and precise. Sophie heard him practicing one afternoon and knocked on his door during a break. "That sounded hard," she said, still in her school uniform. "It is hard, but that's okay. Hard doesn't mean impossible. Can I listen? I promise I'll be quiet." He let her in, set up a chair for her near the window. She sat very still while he played through a particularly difficult passage from the concert program, her eyes wide. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "It sounds lonely but not sad," she said finally. "Just like I thought." He remembered her saying that months ago when her mother first brought her to his door. The phrase still resonated, captured something essential about the instrument, about music, about the life he was building. "Yeah," he said. "Exactly like that." February passed quietly. The courtyard concerts were on hold until spring. Too cold, too dark. But Daniel played anyway, in his apartment with the window cracked, letting the sound drift out into the winter evening. Sometimes people would pause in the courtyard below, listening. He couldn't see them, but he could sense the attention. It felt like connection without contact, presence without intrusion. One evening in late February, Daniel stood at his window with his violin, not practicing any particular piece. Just playing, improvising, following wherever his hands wanted to go. The courtyard was empty, dusted with old snow that had turned gray. The string lights someone had fixed were on, casting a warm glow. He thought about that night in the hallway. Key not turning, Mara's face in the doorway. "You don't live here anymore." The certainty in her voice, the careful architecture of her lie. How small he'd felt in that moment, how erased. And then he thought about now. His studio, his students, his neighbors, Jorge's retirement party, Mrs. Keating's cookies, Sophie's serious face while she practiced, the woman from 11 yelling down that his playing sounded beautiful, Tom suggesting they make the concerts a monthly thing, all the tiny threads of connection that had woven him back into the fabric of this place, not through force or legal action or confrontation, but through simple, persistent presence. Mara had tried to delete him, had changed the locks and reupholstered the furniture and rewritten the story. But she'd failed at the only thing that mattered. She couldn't make him disappear, couldn't erase the fact that he was real, that he took up space in the world, that his music meant something to the people who heard it. He lifted his bow and played a single long note into the cold February air. No audience, no proof required, no argument to make. Just sound. It drifted out the window, faded into the evening dark. Below, a window opened on the 6th floor. He didn't look down to see who it was. Didn't need to. Someone was listening. That was enough. He closed his eyes and played the next note and the next, building something that didn't need a key to enter, something that couldn't be locked out or erased or stolen. Not a home in the way he'd understood it before, not a space defined by walls and furniture and whose name was on the lease. Something bigger than that, something truer. The fact of his presence sung into the world, the sound of his life offered freely to anyone willing to listen. Not proof of anything, not an argument, just existence, undeniable and complete. He played until his fingers grew cold, until the light faded completely from the courtyard. And when he finally lowered his violin and closed the window, he could still hear it, the echo of the music bouncing off the courtyard walls, returning to him slightly altered, like the building itself was remembering, like he'd never been gone at all.